see. I think. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So glad you could be here. As you're coming in, if you could just say hello to us in the chat, let us know who you are, where you're joining from today. That would be lovely. And we're just about to get started in just a moment here. Welcome. If you're just joining us, hi Katie from Clark County. If you could let us know who you are and where you're joining us from in the chat, that would be amazing. We're going to be a lovely group today. Hello, Christina. Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Tanya from Clark County. Hello, welcome everyone. And I think we are going to go ahead and get started. And as you're coming in, please do say hello and let us know where you're coming from. Welcome to, and hi, Gwen, if you wouldn't mind just going back one so I can read the official title of today's webinar. I don't want to mess up the official title. I'm Pam Spiescher from the Region 15 Comprehensive Center at WestEd, and if you are here for the ELD Standards Framework Secondary Mathematics webinar, you are in the right place. Welcome. And my name is Pam Spiescher, as I mentioned, and I'm just here to welcome you all and get us started. So on the next slide, we just have a few Zoom meeting protocols. I'm sure you're very familiar with these, but I'll just briefly let you know. I believe you're already muted, but please do use the chat. Use the chat to reflect, comment, make connections, ask questions. We love it when you're very active in the chat. It really helps us to see kind of how things are connecting with you or what you're curious about. And also, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, but probably primarily we'll be using the chat today. And also, please feel free to use your Zoom reactions. If you see something you like, give us a thumbs up or a heart or whatever it is that you like to use. Just be active. Be as active as you can. We know it's late in the afternoon, but we're going to make this very interactive today. And on the next slide, I am just going to very briefly let you know who I am. I'm Pam Spiescher, and I'm here with my colleagues, Rachel Lagunoff, Ruth Sebastian, and Dr. Hai-Wen Chen, who is your main presenter today from the Region Comprehensive Center. And what we do at the Region 15 Comprehensive Center is we provide capacity building technical assistance to state education agencies. And we have been serving as thought partners with the Nevada Department of Education in this webinar series. And it is my pleasure to not only welcome our esteemed presenter for today, Dr. Hai-Wen Chu, but also to introduce you to Drs. Kulwadi Axtell and Sophia Misavich from the Nevada Department of Education, who are leading this effort of the ELD Standards Framework and the webinar series. So I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Sophia Misavich, to let you know a little bit more about the series and the framework.
Here we go. So thank you, Pam, and thank you everyone for attending this particular webinar. We are launching into another part of a series that we have, particularly directed at content teachers and other educators who really support content teachers and teachers across the organization. So why we have the ELD Standards Framework? Well, it's the responsibility really of all of us. It's a shared responsibility. And what we know is that English learners must have access to rigorous standards-based instruction. And this document that you're going to see today, the ELD Standards Framework, that includes the instructional guidance document, in this case for math, is intended to support educators to ensure the academic success of all students, and particularly English learners. And it really is to fulfill our collective responsibility to all students and their families. Next slide, please. So in this next slide, the purpose is that this webinar series, really, as I said before, is designed for educators to learn how to use the ELD Standards Framework to enact best practices for English learners and other diverse learners. And as we kind of move into our agenda today, before that, really like to know who's participating in the webinar series today. And we're asking the question, really, if you have attended any of the ELD Standards Framework, what's your role and in this progress? Who are you? Oh, wonderful. We have so far 3 math teachers, 4 instructional coaches. We have specialists that supports special assignment. They're on special assignment, English learner specialist. We have 4 school district staff personnel, professional developer and regional RDPD, and 2 NDE staff. And then we have 2 others. Thank you so much for joining us. All of you play a critical role in the education of English learners.
Okay.
So I believe.
Sorry, Sophia, go ahead.
So I think you can close the poll at this time.
And I think you can, if the poll is still going up for you, you can go ahead and click that red dot to close it. Thank you, Sophia. It's really just amazing work that you and your colleagues are doing at the department to support educators across the state. And Hywin, I'm not sure, but the poll keeps popping up on my screen. I don't know if you can permanently close it on your end. Well, I am actually, this is a good segue because it's our pleasure to introduce Dr. Hywin Chu, who is an esteemed math educator and very engaging and just a wonderful, wonderful guide in this process of integrating disciplinary math practices with English language development and just really amazing quality teaching. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Chu to take it away from here.
Thanks, Pam. I'm honored and delighted to be here with educators from across the state of Nevada. I see a lot of familiar names and some familiar faces. I won't have time to say hello to all of you, but it's great to be able to close the loop in terms of how do we really use the ELD Standards Framework as a guidance document that will help us to enhance our mathematics instruction for the English learners that we support. And so as you can see on today's agenda, there are a number of topics that we will address today. And throughout my presentation, you are very much invited to participate in the chat at any time. And we'll do our best to respond to any questions or concerns at the appropriate pause points. So we're going to start out with the guiding principles of the ELD Standards Framework. And very broadly speaking, what that means for teachers and students. From there, we're going to reiterate a vision of what quality mathematics learning is and can be for English learners. But then to get right into an actual example, we are going to talk through a lesson sequence appropriate to the middle school level around proportional reasoning. And that's going to be our example to which we are going to apply more specifically the finer grained elements of the ELD Standards Framework for Secondary Mathematics to really ensure that our lesson sequence has all of the supports that are necessary for English learners to excel in mathematics. And so we're going to be able to take a look at that lesson, and it's sort of fully supported so that English learners can engage alongside all of their peers in challenging mathematics instruction. So I wanted to start very broadly with the ELD guiding principles. And if you've attended previous installments of this web series, you have been introduced to these guiding principles. They actually are aligned very carefully to the Nevada Educator Performance Framework in terms of the 5 key guiding principles are all tied to NEPF standards around what teachers need to be able to do in order to best support their students. And so this is contained in a document for which we have pasted the link in the chat so you can see that's the introduction more broadly speaking to the ELD Standards Framework. And more specifically today, each of the guiding principles is actually elaborated into broad teacher actions, which we can sort of view as the view from 30,000 feet in terms of what all teachers need to do with students. And so the guiding principles, I won't read them and they're in the document, basically are, we're going to only look at the first 3 today for the sake of time. But if we have these 3, then we're well on our way. It's this idea that in order to best engage English learners, we need to know about their assets and explicitly value them in classroom instruction. So they can make those bridges between their prior but not prerequisite experiences and the ambitious disciplinary learning in which we are engaging them. So the idea behind the first 2 guiding principles is if we know where students are and where they're coming from and what they bring, then we're going to be able to engage them fully in grade level, disciplinary, standards-based learning that is appropriately scaffolded. That's guiding principle 2. And we are going to be able to engage them in extended, meaningful discourse that enables them to explore the discipline in great depth. And so just these 3 guiding principles for today. There are other principles around metacognition and formative assessment will be our focus for the sake of time. But it will illustrate a process that we can go through as we look at our instruction and at the instruction of the teachers that we support, because I saw that a plurality of us actually are in the position of supporting teachers, of coaching them or being EL specialists. So if I address the audience as teachers, please add in your mind or the teachers that you support. Okay, and your questions and comments will of course be welcome throughout. But let's turn to this other question, and it's sort of the burning question of my career, which is what is quality learning of mathematics for English learners? And what I would like to present to you today is 3 aspects that are more specific than the broader guiding principles of the ELD Standards Framework. And broadly speaking, they lie along 3 domains. The first domain is the idea of what is mathematics, because mathematics cannot just be a collection of procedures for completing particular computations or tasks. Rather, mathematics needs to be driven by ideas. Why something works, when it works, under what conditions, and what will you need to do when the procedure that you're very good at carrying out doesn't work, right? How do you get unstuck? That is the type of deep adaptive expertise that all of our students are capable of if we provide them with the right opportunities. The other aspect of a conceptual focus in mathematics is we need to think about what students need to do in order to create new mathematics. What are the mathematical practices that we need to support students in? So this idea of mathematics really being driven by ideas and practices, not by just procedures and speed, is actually fundamental to all students. This is what we need to keep in mind as we plan instruction for all students. The next 2 dimensions actually are particularly critical for English learners, and I will elaborate upon them in turn. The first is this idea of designing the invitations that we offer English learners to participate in our classrooms. And so in the moment-to-moment, this means that English learners need to be supported in quality interactions that are characterized by sustained talk that explores ideas in depth, and reciprocal interactions, which is the back and forth discussions and negotiations that enable students to develop and refine their ideas in great depth. And so the idea for English learners is these kinds of quality interactions that are sustained and reciprocal will not happen without the right supports being put in place and the right invitations to enable students to engage in the moment in those quality interactions. At the same time, we also need to think beyond the individual activity, and we need to look at the range of possibilities that we're offering English learners alongside their classmates to change in their participation over time, to grow in their participation throughout the class, throughout a lesson sequence. And so it's this idea, right, which we can think of as the participatory aspect of scaffolding that is so critical for English learners. So that is the dimension that is part of what the ELD Standards Framework helps us to attend to, because it will give us, right when we need it, ideas about how to invite English learners to participate, right, to make the right moves in classroom instruction. And so then the last aspect, and it comes last because language needs to be just in time, language needs to be focused on purposefully, language needs to be put to work by students who understand how language works in mathematics. So we need to take a broader view of language that focuses on the purposes to which it is applied. Again, with this idea, right, that over time, not only will students' participation change, but their language will also grow. In fact, their language will grow more monologic in the sense that they will be able to talk longer and deeper and with greater detail about a particular subject. They'll become more authoritative and more expert in the topics that they discuss. And they'll be able to use language in more technical and precise ways to really get a lot of mathematics expressed and shared with maybe very few words, actually, because of the depth and the technical nature of mathematical discourse. Okay, so that's an ambitious vision. If we could do all of this, we would be very happy with the opportunities offered to English learners. And so these are themes that we will return to because I'm giving you the big picture of what we're trying to accomplish. The ELD Standards Framework gives you finer grained individual steps and moves that will ensure that this broad vision is accomplished. So let's go ahead then and begin thinking about an example, because I think that it's always best to ground things in a particular example. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at a mathematical task that was actually taken from the ELD Standards Framework. And we're going to talk through the process around which you might plan a lesson around that particular problem or topic. So generically speaking, broadly speaking, here are three kinds of things that are helpful to do when you're planning a lesson. It's helpful to read in depth the central problem, text, or concept that you are going to center the lesson around. From there, you're going to be able to identify key ideas and the relevant prior knowledge that students will bring, and English learners in particular. Then we also need to think about, after they've solved the problem, how are we inviting English learners to extend their understanding in new applications or new forms of understanding so that they can really apply and connect their new learning to either ideas previously addressed or brand new situations. And so these are three kinds of moves that are helpful in planning any lesson. What we will refer to the ELD Standards Framework for will be ideas for how to design in scaffolding, how to create the supports, which will consist of those two dimensions, right? The structures for students to participate and interact with each other, either within an activity or across multiple activities. And also choices of language that we're offering to students so that they can focus on ideas and practices. And so as we'll see, we need to offer them choice because we want them to put language to work. We want them to use language to deepen their understanding of mathematics. Okay, so that's the general process that we recommend for thinking through all of the parts of a lesson. Now let's turn to the actual task that we selected around which to develop a lesson sequence, right? The activities that set students up for success. So this is a problem that was originally sourced from Illustrative Mathematics. I'll let you read it. It is about a sale, and it is about students trying to compare different discounts, 4 different discounts, in order to be able to try and figure out which one actually is the best deal. And what are the assumptions, right? What are the assumptions that one needs to make around that particular problem? And so in the spirit of guiding principle 1, which is to value students' assets and to make explicit connections with their prior but not prerequisite knowledge, I'm going to go ahead and ask you in the chat to please drop in a few ideas. What might English learners bring in terms of prior knowledge or lived experiences to this particular problem? So please go ahead and drop in a few ideas into the chat. And as you do that, I'll explain what I mean by prior but not prerequisite knowledge. If we take the perspective that we value students' assets and lived experiences, it means that all knowledge that they have, all lived experiences that they have had are valid and can be connected to our target learning. It's this idea that it is prior knowledge because it came before the lesson started, but it's not a prerequisite to their participation in the lesson. So that's a big shift, right? Because in a lot of more traditional classrooms, we sort of sometimes have observed that instruction is viewed linearly, right? First list, then that. And so that's why this idea of prior knowledge is so important. So we have lots of ideas in the chat, thank you, around shopping, drive-throughs, grocery stores, and back-to-school shopping. That's fabulous. Yeah, so good. We have a hot topic where students will have prior knowledge, and so we just need to make sure that we connect and then narrow from that prior knowledge to the kinds of things that they're going to need to be able to do here. Okay, so that was sort of our setup. We now have like a direction, right? And we now have a sense of what students might bring. And so what I'm going to now talk us through is the outline of a lesson. Because what I want to paint for all of us is to have a common example in mind where we have the same instructional trajectory, and that instructional trajectory should make sense. It should be like a story that unfolds over time with a beginning, middle, and end. And then we'll need to take a critical look to ensure that adequate supports are built in for English learners to participate in every activity of the lesson, and therefore also the instructional trajectory, right? The conceptual trajectory of the lesson. Okay, so here we go. It's important to activate and connect to prior knowledge. So a good task that can do this is a think, pair, share. We recommend doing a think, pair, share in the following fashion. First, give students time to think individually about a prompt and maybe jot down some ideas. Then they work with a partner and they go back and forth and they discuss their ideas with each other. Then in the whole group format, when students are either called upon or volunteer, what they're sharing is not what they said because they just said it. Rather, they share what their partner said, which means, of course, they have to not only listen carefully when their partner is sharing, but they also have to, over time, develop that skill of how do you faithfully, how do you represent the core of someone's idea, right? Which is actually a very valuable skill. So we recommend this structure for think, pair, share because it will maximize the opportunities that students will have to actually share their ideas. And as you might have guessed, what the prompt is tell me about a time you or your family bought something on sale. What did you buy and how much did you save? And so in the share out, students will bring up things like the objects that the items that they purchased, how much they saved, how much the total original price was. Maybe some of them will talk about percentages, right? But what you're doing is You're activating their prior experiences with this idea of a sale. And hopefully in that discussion, you can begin to insert the idea of what's more important, the amount that you're sharing, which is a dollar amount, right? Like $5, or the percentage that you're sharing, right? Because is sharing $5 really that good if I'm buying a car, kind of thing? Those are the kinds of things that begin to come up as you're connecting students' prior and lived experiences to the topic at hand. Okay, that's the first task, and keep those chat messages coming if there are questions or comments. Okay, so we've set the stage, and now we're going to narrow a little bit, because now we're going to introduce some of the more computational and numeracy-based ideas that you would want students to explore. So that might include the following task, where you have students work in groups of no more than 4. You provide them with a deck of cards that has many different discounts. You have the students take turns one by one, where they take a card out, they read the card out to the group, and then they try to sort these cards in order. So these cards are set up with 2 of the missing pieces that you need, right? Because you need the percent discount, you need the total amount, and you need the amount of the discount. And so if you take a quick scan of these cards, I mean, we wouldn't give the students all of them at once, because we want the cards to unfold over time so they have the time to make connections. You will begin to see there's actually many ways that you could sort these discounts, right? Please pop into the chat if you can, some different ways that students might think to sort some of these, I guess we can just call them cards, but the cards have some sort of discount attached to them. And so the folks are saying things like the largest savings, I think you mean the probably absolute dollar amount savings to the percent off, right? Those are the 2 dominant approaches. And there's ambiguity in this task, which is completely intentional, because we want students to not argue, but we want them to negotiate. Does it make sense, right? To look at the total dollars saved, or as a percentage, which one is a better deal? So it's that kind of discussion that this is actually designed to set up. And so again, because we're expecting, this is not the first time that students have ever seen percents, that they're going to be able to connect this question with their prior mathematical experiences. Okay, so with these 2 activities, I think we've set the stage adequately for students to explore the problem at hand, right? Which I will remind you has 4 different discounts. And so the one choice that we recommend making is to think about how the roles in the participation structure you set up are related to the problem. So what we would do once we give students the problem from a couple of slides ago is we would have them work collaboratively, and we would actually distribute one of the discounts to each of the 4 students in a group, so that they kind of become that discount. Now they're in charge of that discount, and they have like the first say about what they think that discount means when different group members propose different amounts to try, right? Like, what if the first item is worth $100 and the second item is worth $50? Then what's the best deal there? And so the idea there is you're having them collaboratively make a table of values that they're going to use to explore, and you're assigning the roles so that each student in the group of 4 is the first person responsible for a particular discount. Of course, they can help each other, but the idea is you want those students to have the first pass, so they have a way to participate, right? They need to speak up for that particular discount. And so afterwards, they can try different scenarios that are generated by the group. And the purpose of this is then to answer the questions and to be able to come up with a group consensus about what order do these discounts go in, and what is your evidence for that. Okay, so we have a lot of possibilities here, but you will see how the roles are defined by the task, right? The 4 different discounts become the 4 students in the group. And so this way of setting up the group work offers more opportunities for them to participate with each other. Okay, so then how are they going to apply this idea? Well, not all of our students are going to end up being copywriters for sales, but it's actually a skill, right? How do you write a catchy discount? So we would put students in pairs, and we would have each pair of students come up with a discount, which in this case is a verbal description of a deal, right? Like 2 for the price of 1, which is buy one, get one free, right? Kind of thing. We would have them come up in pairs with a new discount that is completely different from the first 4. We would have them in pairs now try a few other amounts and scenarios, right, in a pair to figure things out in terms of what the items would be and what the discounts would be. We would then ask them, okay, now that you have some numbers to run with, how does this discount compare with the other 4? And finally, we would have pairs exchange discounts to try them out and to try and figure out, okay, do we agree about where this discount would fit across the spectrum of 4 that have already been established? And so this task illustrates how to support English learners in generating new discounts, right? Generating new scenarios that they're then explicitly connecting to the 4 that they have studied very closely and very well. Okay, so that was much faster than what I would do with students, because we're just talking about the trajectory to give you an idea of sort of the key ways that the activities build upon each other. So now I want to give us some time to look back at the sequence, right? So each of the activities that we had students engage in had a purpose, a conceptual purpose. It's kind of the objective of that activity is to have students surface what they've experienced in the past with sales, then sort through numerical discounts, then compare and order multiple discounts that are given in this, sort of catchy verbal way, but then ultimately to create and compute and compare new discounts, right? This is the trajectory of the lesson conceptually. And so the question that I'm going to ask is, as you look back at these different activities, the question is in the title, right? How did these activities actually support meaningful discourse and extended discourse, which is guiding principle 3, right? That we want English learners to engage in that extended and meaningful discourse. So go ahead and please drop in a few ideas in the chat, and that can be a nice way to reflect, right? Because hopefully we've got something there. Hopefully we've got a pulse. And we won't have time to talk through every single activity, right? Because you could actually go through and you could actually analyze for each of these activities where the opportunities were. So we have, with the discussion of the problem, right, sort of that all students need to contribute to the team. We have someone remarking about this idea of new discounts being a way to, argue through sort of what would be a good new discount, right? You can imagine students having lots of interesting discussions about how to phrase the discount in a catchy way. And we're sort of pointing out that the tasks, the activities were designed so that students had different pieces of information that they had to share in order to put together like a broader puzzle. Okay, so there are lots of opportunities here, but by no means is this a perfect lesson. By no means is everything in place per se. And so that's actually why we're going to turn to the ELD Standards Framework, because what we would like to say is once you have like a good story arc, right, that's the time to go back and then make sure that in each activity, in each task that you've asked students to engage in, that there are enough supports built in to fully support English learners in deep participation. So we're going to now turn to the ELD Standards Framework, and in particular, the 2 that are in mathematics. The ELD Standards Framework is a fabulous resource, in part because it was designed very carefully to address the disciplines at different grade bands And so it's meant to be tailored to the particular level of students that you are working with and the subject matter. And so in the chat are going to come a couple of links to both the grades 6-8 document and the grades 9-12 document. The examples that we are going to look at today come from the grades 6-8 document. And overall, the ELD Standards Framework has the following structure. We'll be looking at the sections that are relevant to language for developing the mathematics of grades 6 and 8. That's section 2. And then we'll turn at the end to look at section 3, which is how teachers can support English learners in engaging in the mathematical practices, the standards for mathematical practice. And so in some sense, the rest of what we're going to do today is we're going to use the ELD Standards Framework in secondary mathematics to critically examine the lesson that I've outlined before, to see if there's anything that we can add to enhance the opportunities offered to English learners to participate and to use language. And so that's actually part of why the ELD Standards Framework document is useful at this juncture, because it provides both the student moves and the teacher moves for engaging in receptive and productive and academic uses of language altogether. And so the idea as we go through these slides, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to, as we go through these slides, highlight some of the ideas that we can then make sure are included in the lesson as we look at it. Okay, that's the plan for why we're looking at the ELD Standards Framework, what we're going to get out of it. Another nice feature about the ELD Standards Framework is that it is organized by English learners' proficiency level as determined by the WIDA access. The key thing to note here is it is helpful to have some idea of the different kinds of supports that might be appropriate at different levels. But we want to emphasize that a student's WIDA level is always a lagging indicator of what that student is capable of because of the last time that that student took the test. But more importantly, because all tests, all standardized tests are measures of individuals, it does not represent what a student is capable of in interaction with others. So the idea is if students are well supported in engaging participation with their peers, they're actually going to be capable of more than what they would be able to do on their own. That's why we go to class. And so as you look through this document, I'm probably mostly going to focus on the middle column, which is the developing and expanding, to try and get ideas. And you can already begin to see that it's very oriented around the actions that you want students to do. So what do you want students to do with those cards that have the discounts? Well, you want them to compare and to sort them and to think about what order they might go in as they read. And then how do you express that, right? Because there's when they're reading the cards and now they have to express their understandings to be able to interpret what's going on and to explain how to use these things in practice, how to use these ideas in practice. And so it's important to identify those student moves in terms of what you want them to do and therefore what language might be helpful. In addition, we also need to consider the teacher moves. What does the teacher need to do in terms of setting up the students, both in terms of the participation structures and in terms of the language invitations that is being offered to students? And so there's a lot of ideas here that are helpful, like building background knowledge, modeling key pieces of language that are going to assist students, and providing them, right, with the structure, providing them with the organizer that's going to help them make connections and see ideas. So that's where the ELD Standards Framework is very helpful, right? Really beginning to see where we might need to offer English learners more support than their classmates. And also the case in collaborating, right? If you look down the middle column, it's about how do you engage students in pair work? How do you give students different ways of contributing to small group discussions? Okay, so let's go ahead then and see, try to have a critical assessment of what is in place already in terms of that lesson and therefore what might need to be added. And so here are the moves that we were able to identify by looking through the ELD Standards Framework to align the teacher actions and the student actions to the different particular tasks of the lesson. And I won't read this slide. We'll send out the PowerPoint afterwards, and there will be a recording. But the idea is, right, that we're able to pull together from individual elements of the ELD Standards Framework these overarching descriptions that are tailored to this particular lesson, right? So for Think, Pair, Share, for instance, what the teacher did was carefully structure the pair work to share experiences, right? And it's the share part, share what your partner said, not what you said, that is part of that particular structure. And we see that what the student language use expectations are there are they need to think, listen, speak, and report their partner's ideas, right? It's already a very rich kind of task in terms of language. And we can go through step by step through each of the tasks to see what's in place and also to get ideas about what we might want to add, right? Because we want to always approach our lesson planning and instruction with the spirit of improvement. So I'll let you read through the rest of the table, but the basic idea, right, is this is a way of looking at a lesson plan in order to strengthen it as necessary. Okay. For the sake of time, I'm going to proceed, but keep those questions and comments coming because we're happy to address them. But I do want to turn now to a somewhat different topic, which is our last topic for today, which is how do we explicitly attend to the standards for mathematical practice. And so we would like you to respond in the chat to the following question. If we're focused on the mathematical practice of reason abstractly and quantitatively, how does the previous sequence of activities support English learners in that process of reason abstractly and quantitatively? And again, in the spirit of improvement, what additional supports might we need to add in? What additional supports might be necessary to ensure that English learners not only are they engaging in reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, but they know that they're reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, right? Because sometimes, and it's not just English learners, but with English learners in particular, they're actually doing something that's a deep practice, but they may not have a name for it. They may not know what they're doing, right? So part of what we especially need to do with English learners is offer them those opportunities that make explicit that what you're doing is this, and these were the choices that you had. So please pop in a few responses to the chat. The mathematical practice is to reason abstractly and quantitatively. Okay, we have one comment, which is about the scale of the participation, the pair work that supports them in advancing their ideas, and then maybe offering some keywords to choose from with which they discuss. There's talk of building on the knowledge. And there's talk about the language that will enable them to connect those ideas. And we're thinking about, do we want more, do we want more supports for them to develop some fluency around the mathematics, right? Around the computations that are necessary. Sorry, camera malfunction. The show will go on. Okay. So let's actually go ahead then and take a look at what that means within the ELD Standards Framework. So one other thing to love about the ELD Standards Framework is that it is explicitly addressing the math practices and the WIDA key uses of language. It connects each of the math practices to the four key uses of academic language that are front and center in the WIDA framework. And the ELD Standards Framework also has identified tasks that might be very well suited to particular standards for mathematical practice. So that's part of the overall structure. Now let's go ahead and look at sort of what that looks like in terms of teacher moves and what that looks like in terms of student moves with regard to reason abstractly and quantitatively. Okay. So Here are the teacher moves for reason abstractly and quantitatively. And I think I've said already that my overall strategy is to go down the center and then adjust left and right, right? So we're going to look at that center column, which is all about what are the dialogue structures that teachers are offering, what are the pieces of language, and what are the situations like the illustrations or scenarios that we want students to engage in. So I'm looking down the middle column of the levels 3 and 4. So I'm trying to get some ideas for what might be necessary. And then it also identifies some of the success criteria, some of the student-facing, type moves that might be particularly helpful for students to actually engage with each other in these discussions with one another. Opportunities for students to use language and to share their reasoning by talking through and describing their steps. Okay, so having read the ELD Standards Framework for some ideas, what we honestly did is we went back to the drawing board and said, you know, we're not sure that what's in the lesson right now gives students quite enough to reason abstractly and quantitatively. So what we did was we said, so what can we offer? What can we offer them that makes explicit the kind of moves, the conceptual moves that one needs to make as one is reasoning abstractly and quantitatively? How can we provide students with the pieces of language that will enable them to engage in that kind of work? So based upon our deconstruction of the mathematical practice to reason abstractly and quantitatively, we devised a dialogue guide to assist pairs of students as they are discussing the problem, probably in those small groups when they each have a card, right? You might want to give them some time to unpack the problem first. And so what we said was, when you're reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, there's 3 things that you can do. Those are the 3 choices on the left. You can change values. You can use pictures or symbols, right? You can call the price P if you're so inclined. And you can work forwards and backwards. Those are the 3 kinds of things that typically are helpful when you are reasoning abstractly and quantitatively. So what we want English learners is to be able to choose when they want to try numerical values, when they want to try symbols, when they want to either back it up or move it forward in terms of what they're trying in terms of the problem. And so they have a choice, right? This is the key. You want to ensure that students have a choice about what they're going to do, because maybe in this scenario, it's more helpful to them to draw a picture or to use a symbolic representation. It's going to depend. And just as students need a choice about what they're going to do to engage in a mathematical practice, they also need choices for what language they can use in order to achieve that purpose. And so what this absolutely is a menu of choices related to this bigger idea of reason abstractly and quantitatively. And so you will see I have not just a choice of action, but I also have a choice of language, because over time we want students to become those critical consumers of language in the doing of mathematics. We want them to understand when maybe trying this is going to help them more than the alternative. And we want them not to follow rigid predetermined scripts, but to have a genuine and honest back and forth discussion with their partners so that together they can figure out what they already know and what they have to figure out together. And so this structure, which is meant for a pair of students to go back and forth, discussing the problem, offering new ideas from the choices over time, right? They're not going to get it all right the first time. It's over time as they engage in this practice over and over again, but each time with greater sophistication, they're going to be able to really participate in this mathematical practice with the kind of depth that they are capable of. And so that is one approach, right? Again, drawn from the ELD Standards Framework, where what we're trying to do is to look at what are the language supports, those are the choices, and what is the participatory structure. We recommend pairs, but this would also work in slightly larger groups as long as they're good at taking turns and listening and negotiating, right? This is something that we think would enhance English learners' experiences across the lesson sequence that we have just outlined. Okay, so that concludes the new content that I had today. So I'm going to leave it open I'm going to leave it open to other questions and comments. Hopefully, the other moderators will be able to ask me a few questions that we can begin to address. And hopefully I can also stabilize my camera.
I was on mute. Please, if you have questions or connections you're making for Dr. Chu, that would be lovely. I'm looking through the chat and I'm going to ask my colleagues also to see if they saw any questions that came up. Lots of comments about making connections. Earlier, there was a connection made to, they love the extension idea of having students actually create their own. Lots of opportunities to produce and process language throughout, which I think was a key point you were making. It's not just at one part of the lesson, it's throughout and it's authentic. And I think what Diana Walker's making a comment about the way that you are presenting the use of sentence frames or starter supports, which is really connected to the meaning and the disciplinary practice. So it's not generic, it's very specific and targeted to the disciplinary learning and the language that's needed to engage in the disciplinary learning. Do you want to make a comment on any of those?
Sure. Let's talk just a little bit more about sort of sentence frames, sentence starters, and formulaic expressions. Apologies to those of you in Clark County who've heard this before, but we often like to say, right, that sometimes, unfortunately, a sentence starter is a question in disguise. And what we would prefer to have students engage in is language, right, pieces of language that connect different ideas. Right. So if we go back quickly to some of what's there, right? Just look at the first row in terms of changing the values, right? There's multiple things that we're trying to kind of connect. If I double, the price, then what happens to the discount kind of thing? And so the idea here is we want uses of language that you can plug in, like a math formula. You can plug in different things, and what you're looking for is how are ideas being connected, right? How are ideas being changed? And that's distinct from you can imagine a script that would go, the total amount of the object was, the percentage discount was, the amount of the discount was, right? And it's not that that won't help students, right? I mean, that absolutely will help students. It's a question of, over time, are we giving them more choices about what they're going to focus on first, right? So our approach is always, wherever possible, to offer students as much choice. It has to be, like we're giving you a choice, right? We also have to be super explicit about that, because over time, that's going to enable them to reflect and to engage in metacognitive development. Because metacognitive development, quite simply, is knowing how to get unstuck when you don't know what to do next with a problem, right? It's being able to redirect. I'm fond of saying, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them does not mean if something's not working, you just keep trying it. It means you find some other approach, right? Some other strategy that might get you there. So thank you for that question. And finally, I think we can touch on the comment in the chat about sort of starting in the middle and then adjusting up and down. That was in reference to in the ELD Standards Framework. That's a nice place to begin. And again, the reason I like that is even students who are bureaucratically labeled as levels 1 and 2 are capable of the kinds of things in the level 3 and 4 column with the right kinds of support, right? Because that's why we go to school, because we get to interact and we get to do more than we would be able to alone. So it's in that spirit that I think the ELD Standards Framework can be helpful in terms of ensuring that that lesson is realizing its potential to support and challenge English learners. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Looks like there's a question about, is there a place with more dialogue guide samples? And I'm not sure if,
Yeah, we can send out some to those who are interested, some other published examples. Yeah. Okay.
right?
All right, so thank you so much, Dr. Chu, and to the WestEd staff for really supporting us in this work. That was exceptional. I think just understanding how a lesson really can be enhanced with the ELD Standards Framework. So what we have coming up, of course, are other webinars. And we have some wonderful people who will be presenting these webinars in the content areas. They have expertise in ELD and also in content. So our next webinar will be on elementary ELA, which will be March 23rd. And then, of course, you can see the others that we have. So now we are moving through specifically webinars for the content areas. So we'd like for you to join us again, and then certainly spread the word, because this is such an important document to ensure that all of us collectively really address the needs of English learning, and particularly not just now because of COVID and the possible learning loss. We know from what's emerging in some of the data that we see that math is a particular area that we need to focus on, and for all of our learners who will be possibly falling behind. So please join us for these webinars. So in the next slide, please, here's our contact information. So the leads on this in the English Language Development Department at NDE, myself, Sophia Masavich, and also my colleague, Dr. Kawadi Axtell. So do contact us, and we certainly will provide you with the information. I do want you to know, to all participants, we will send out this PowerPoint. It's recorded also and will be up on our website. The PowerPoint, however, will be sent particularly to you, but the recording is on the website. So thank you so much for joining us again.
And we do have, I believe we have a survey. It's pasted in the chat, and we really value your feedback. It's very helpful to us as we progress through the webinar series. So if you could please grab that link in the chat, and I'm going to ask Ruth to paste it in there again, and give us your feedback. We really do value it. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.